Hello, this is Pastor A.R. Bernard for part two of a conversation that we started around this election and voting. With me today is esteemed attorney Keith White.
Hi.
And in the area of finance, we have, and one of the ministers of CCC, Lisa Purville, finance, let me get it right. It's a relationship manager for Wells Fargo.
Yes.
And of course, our own PJ, Jamaal Bernard. We're going to start off picking up where we left off somewhat, but talking about the culture, because politics is symptomatic of the culture. Politics is power. Who's got it and who's benefiting from that power? And those are the things we challenge with our vote, the power of that vote, which we should never, ever diminish, because there are people saying my vote doesn't matter. It does. Every vote counts. So what does the current political climate say about our culture here in America?
It's a lot. It says a lot. Just looking at the tension from just a racial aspect. Is the culture is trying to manage the conversation of one, is there racism? Two, if there is racism, what does it look like? And three, how do we resolve if there's racism? What does it look like? And now, how do we resolve it? And you can see that not only in the conversations on social media, between individuals, but you also can see that as being the governing talking points. You got COVID, and you have racism as one of the governing talking points for the politicians as they speak through elections from a local level all the way to the federal level.
That's interesting, because racism is influencing our politics. So are we voting based on race? Because we got two white presidential candidates. So how is it racial?
I mean, I think the issues right now are at the forefront in terms of going back to the racial tension that we see in America. I don't think it's anything, I think it's nothing that has gone away. I think it's something that's, I almost call like an awakening for some people. I think we're starting to have to reckon with the people who might have said, oh, I'm not racist, but now you start to hear their verbiage and you're like, wait a minute, actually you are.
Yes.
And I think it's like, if there's anything that this election is showing, it's like almost people's masks are coming off. And so even for me, I'm discovering people that, that I knew that I'm like, wow, that's really how you feel. That's interesting. I didn't know that. And, it's challenging. And no, there's neither one of those candidates are Black or of any other ethnicity, and yet it's yes, we're also looking to them somehow, right, to reconcile this race issue that we have in America, which is ironic.
So we're looking at a white president,
right,
to reconcile the racial issues that we have in our nation. I guess we're also trying to see who is going to be most sensitive to our plight. And there is definitely a plight for those who are denying that there are racial issues in our country, or that, there is systemic racism in our nation.
Well, I think that it's consistent that we would have two white candidates running on this platform of where they stand on the issues of race, class, and economics. I mean, the roots and culture of this country are rooted in white nationalism. America is an experiment in white nationalism, how to create a utopian society for people fleeing from Europe. And so it's consistent for me, and I don't necessarily think that the issue is their stance on just race, but what their stance on is on a bevy of issues which speak more to their values.
Wait. You said an experiment in white nationalism.
Yes.
But I was taught that it was about religious freedom, that, the Puritans, the Moravians, the Calvinists, they were fleeing religious oppression, the Anglican state church, and they came to America to establish the city on a hill, that would eventuate into the nation on the hill. And you're saying it's an experiment in white nationalism?
Yes, because white is a social construct, and white is, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So the definition of white is a social construct. So those people fleeing Europe, right, were coming here to embrace a whiteness that is unique to America.
Wait. So white people were fleeing from white people in order to establish
I don't know that white
society.
I don't know that white as a social construct existed the same way that it does. But what it became here is it became a social construct that says you're in. If you're when, and we've had this conversation, when Irish people came here, they weren't white.
Right.
When Italians came here, they weren't white. When Jewish people came here, they weren't white, right? But they became white adjacent, and then they became part of a white infrastructure.
Right.
And so that's been the history of America. Groups have been fighting to get in to be part of the white infrastructure.
Yep. There's a grafting
Yeah.
of different ethnicities and groupings to come in.
But now I think
And even when we see some black people,
Right.
they're fighting to be
become-
white adjacent.
but isn't that-
and that's huge because a lot of minorities are doing the same thing as well. So not
Yeah, I
just
was gonna say
black.
that's the dilemma. The assimilation into America is, in essence, the model of grasping a whiteness.
Right.
That's
So
James Baldwin.
I'm going to be sarcastic. So the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and of course it was happening before that, was that a fight for the right for people of color to be white?
So James Baldwin has this incredible essay called The Price of the Ticket. And the premise is, what do you give up to be here? And when we give up the conversation about human rights, when we forfeit the conversation about human rights, and we say this is about civil rights, we are saying that whatever God has ordained and established for us as human beings, we're putting that to the side, and we're going to subject ourselves to man's laws and what they say about us. And so when we subject ourselves to the civil rights movement, right, into civil rights conversations, we're saying, hey, accept us. And whether it's accept us as black people within your system or accept us as white, that I think that's an individual conversation that people can have with themselves. And I don't want to put people in a binary position of in or out, but I think that's an important conversation that people have to have with themselves.
In or out, and that's a tough one because that's what creates the divide. And who's legitimate and who is not legitimate. So the American dream is presented, and we're saying that according to how we read that Declaration of Independence, it was open for everyone, but it really wasn't. So isn't it that America was structured in a way that allows its citizenry, because I'm reflecting on the Declaration of Independence, to hold America accountable to its ideals and its values? Isn't that the way it was structured? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, which include
No, because
life, liberty, and
if
pursuit
that
of
was the
happiness.
case, then it would have required me and PJ to equal or be a little bit more than one white guy.
Yes.
Right? Because we were both 3/5.
Three-fifths, yep.
Right, because you're also writing it and holding it accountable. So even that, you're writing and defining these terms. So
And
I'm
it's-
going to write alienable rights, and I'm going to define what alienable rights means, and I'm going to make it subjective to what I think it means, and so forth. So then now I can use language like 3/4. That makes total sense because I'm the author and I'm the definer of things, and so
3/5.
3/5. Sorry.
So the Constitution is open.
My bad.
It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, but Pastor, look at
These founding documents are
even
open to
the point where,
interpretation.
from a scientific perspective, they have left the whole idea of Homo sapien open to balance this fact of looking at another grouping of humans less than. So when you look at the definition, it's so ambiguous that you can't really come up with a full statement of what it is to be human from a scientific perspective.
this is
and that's why we have to go to a religious perspective.
But this is 2020.
Right.
To this day, it's still open.
These are concepts and ideas that go back 250 years, 300 years, 400 years, right? And yet we're still having this conversation today, especially as we face the opportunity, right, to put someone in office or keep someone in office based upon what they're going to do for our communities. Here we are having this conversation. Why?
Because I think, you know, even down to looking at the ceiling, you know, if I look at just work, right, you know, so we may say, oh, well, there's no ceiling. It's like, yes, there's still a ceiling. I think they just maybe lifted a little higher so it's an illusion that I can go further in my career. So you say, oh, you know, work hard, go to school, get an education, you know, and if you work hard, you can get a good job. If you work at that good job really, really well, you can get a promotion. But what you find in many companies is that even if you get into that space, especially in corporate America, Black people are not getting promoted as quickly as their, you know, white counterparts. And so then you'll have spaces and you have senior leadership looking as very white, and you'll have lower levels looking very Black. And then you're saying, wait, something is still not right. There's still something wrong systemically that even if we were to abide by these so-called American dream rules, somehow we're still not matriculating or going fast at the same pace. There's still something that's holding us back, and it can no longer be because we're not educated or we don't. And so now it becomes, all right, we got to read. Something's wrong.
Something's wrong.
Still wrong.
You could feel it. You could feel it. But are we, as people of color, looking in the wrong place when we're looking to one of the major political parties to resolve this situation that we've been dealing with?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Because both,
Are we right?
both parties have failed us. Both parties have failed us as people of color to respond correctly to what is evidence. You know, you can see that there's something that needs to be done, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go far enough to get these votes, and then once I get voted in, we didn't get a chance to, you know, so we put that agenda to the side, you know. Everybody, because most of these, especially from certain parties, they have some sort of an idea of a Black agenda, right? That starts making its way through the news, through the media, and then all of a sudden it's just, okay, what happened to that Black agenda?
Well, I think that a lot of times it gets co-opted with language like socialism, right? And I think that, and you know, I know this in full transparency, I am probably closer to a socialist than any other political definition, right? The definition of socialism is where the people control the means to production. But I do think that, for example, watching the first debate with Biden and Trump, and as soon as Trump started to, you know, mention the radical left and socialism,
Right.
AOC, you know, it felt like Biden buckled. And instead of embracing what makes sense about policy positions, what makes sense about equity, fairness, what makes sense about union rights, what makes sense about that conversation, he said, no. You know, that's, you know, I'm not going to be beholden to the left, you know, side of my party. And I think that that is what stifles, that's what stifles the spectrum of thought, belief, ideas, ideals in our political discourse, is when we're so afraid to go there, like go there and say, you know, hey, this is the thing. And so, you know, there was no truth in that debate because they're rigidly trying to pander for popularity.
Right.
But the rhetoric stirs the fear when you use the term Marxist socialist, you know,
What's scary
or
about
fascists.
But what's scary about
is how
that?
somebody has to lose their privilege, right? So somebody has to lose
Say that again?
something, right? Somebody has to lose their privilege. That's what's scary, right? So it's all good.
Right.
Black Lives Matter is all good until I have to give up something. So you're saying to me that if, you know, Black Lives Matter means that more Black people are going to get access to jobs and to funding, well, that must mean that I won't get access to said jobs and funding. And now it becomes now you're encroaching on my space, you know, like and that becomes an issue. So as long as, because even for those who are Black, and you said this, and I commented on this with you, it said, even as Black people, we exist in a space of privilege. So now if we have to begin to rethink our thoughts and say, even as we fight, okay, so what are we willing to say, maybe give up so to help somebody else, so that
Let's talk about kids in cages at the border.
Yeah.
What are we doing? What are we saying? Are we walking past that conversation?
And that's the dangerous thing about this climate, because what you're saying, and you, is that we're dealing with perceptions and not reality, because we're not taking the time to discuss what's real.
Right.
So the moment, in the debate, President Trump threw that whole Marxist socialist thing towards Biden, instead of him saying, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? What do you mean by that?
Yes.
Right.
Because look, we've got social programs. They're part of our history here in America. He didn't do that, which means that, again, the perception behind that rhetoric scares even those who are running for office, that they won't take it head on and confront it.
Yep. And we were talking earlier, the problem is that I can support certain truths or certain realities about a specific idea or ideology that makes sense, that works for us. So, for example, we do have social initiatives. We have things that respond socially that comes out of socialism. But does that mean I fully support all of socialism and all of the ideas that, because there are some ideas that are flawed within socialism, just like there are ideas that are flawed within democracy. And so, nothing is foolproof, where it doesn't lend for any aspects of failure.
So why did I get attacked on that Sunday service where I simply presented the fears that each side has of the other side, and then I presented the historical mixed reality of our political economy? And I said there are flaws on both sides, there's merit on both sides, and why can't we come together and find common ground? I was attacked for that.
Well, I think that
You said the best.
I think a couple of things. One, I watched the service and I was like, yeah, I don't agree with that, right? I don't necessarily agree with some of the precepts around the democratic issues. But I also understood there was something that PJ had said that I thought was incredibly powerful. Was that the concept of Marxism is also rooted in this concept of superiority. And it's the idea that when I introduce a concept or an idea to you or a political discourse to you, you should obey, you should follow it because I understand it and because I'm better than you. And it's something I learned from the Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, is that when we enter into discourse with one another, it becomes a place of exchange. It becomes a place for us to learn first and then teach. And I think that when we start introducing concepts of Marxism, socialism, which are concepts that I'm in alignment with, right? But when we start introducing them without context, without history, without understanding how they've been harmful at times, free market capitalism has obviously been harmful to the environment, in my opinion, right? So
Climate change, here we go.
So, but when we start talking about these things without embracing fully these concepts, we don't get to the truth of the matter. And I think that was the issue for me.
Okay, and now when we talk about...
So people were in their feelings.
Yes.
People were in their feelings because we all bring baggage to conversations and discourse. So
what I was saying was being filtered?
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
That's a problem, because we've got to think critically. We've got to be aware of those filters if we want to hear well. Jesus said we can have eyes and not see, ears and not hear, because you've got filters that are filtering out what's actually being said.
Right.
And your perceptions and feelings and emotions take over and determine how you hear, which will determine how you respond, how you react to it.
But people often think they come to things with a blank slate, and people don't realize that they don't. Like, nobody comes to any bit of information with a blank slate, with no preconceived notions, no biases, we always talk about, you see by the conditions of your heart, so to think that you just watch television as a blank slate and just are so perceptive that you can just extrapolate information. It's like, no, you have to, even me watching a service, you still have things going on in your head that are helping you to filter out the information because certain things are being highlighted to you. So you do them because we all have trigger words. You can say something, it's like, and then your mind can go on a tangent and miss everything else that you say because you said this one word, and now you come back to the conversation, you go, oh, I don't like what pastor said.
That's what happens when I watch Love and Hip Hop.
No, it's a trip. So you just your mind is zoned out, and you come back and you're like, I'm writing a letter. But you didn't even hear the whole thing, and you truly didn't hear. You watched it, but you truly didn't listen to.
Well, this is what Jesus was saying when he said, "You need to remove the beam from your eye in order to see clearly, in order to pass judgment on your brother or your sister." In other words, you come clouded. You come with barriers, and he called it a beam.
Right.
Because, as opposed to the speck in the other person's eye, you got this beam, you got this big log that you've got to deal with that's affecting your perception, that's blocking your vision. And you've got to deal with that first in order to hear and see clearly.
You also got to hold space for disagreement. I think that's what makes our relationship so strong, right? Is that we have different political views, different social views, right? But at the same time, we love and respect each other, and we know where our values are. And so because we know where our values are, we say, you know what? Let's have a discourse. Let's have a conversation about it. Also, our experiences are very different. Generationally, this is something you taught me a few years ago. When we talk about the Republican versus the Democratic Party, we're talking about small government versus big government. There was a time where Black people really relied on small government during Reconstruction, right? Or coming after Reconstruction, we relied on small government in order to take advantage of what happened or what freedoms we could now exercise after slavery. And so there's also been a shift where small government has not been helpful because then we were left with Black codes, right? And then there came a time where small government, again, became very fruitful, and it became the thing that actually helped Black achievement, Black advancement. And so generationally, things have been changing. So the idea that you could be a proponent of free market capitalism and I would be a proponent of socialism or democratic socialism makes sense to me.
Yeah. And without us being at odds with each other, because there's a set of core values that we share. That is the common ground for our relationship.
And he could still be your pastor.
Right.
Because it got so bad when people wanted to leave the church. And because of that, and I'm like, wow, I think he provides more spiritually than politically. And if you come to church for this, but somebody said, I can't remember who he said, whenever you come to a discourse, if your desire is to understand yourself more than the person, it's no longer discourse, it's an argument. He said, when you come to a discourse, your goal should be, okay, let me understand this individual. Then we can have proper dialogue. And that's one of the things, like when you see some of the debates and some of the conversations via social media, how people will berate another individual from having just a different view or a different opinion. And they would just attack them. And I was like, wow, where is the humanity aspect in some of these conversations?
Somebody said something to me on social media to try to goad me into a debate. And I said, unfortunately, I don't debate on social media. It's not the right forum. It doesn't give either of us an opportunity to really hear each other. We should be trying to define our positions, not defend. And the person said, well, how about we do a Zoom, me, you, and Pastor Jamaal?
How did I get a
You're going to referee it? So put the big guy in the middle. He'll keep the peace.
Well, I think I think their position was that you would also hold me accountable in terms of my views. And I think that for me, it was a little bit troubling because I was like, that's what social media has become. It's become an opportunity for people to kind of like clout chase and show that they're smart, and not an opportunity for us to really engage.
In dialogue.
I had a conversation with one of our members, successful entrepreneur in the realm of education, providing educational services, and she was responding to the service as well. And she said she found herself in a little bit of a dilemma because she says, on some issues, I'm conservative. And on other issues, I'm liberal. And she was expressing a very real tension that many persons of color, and I'm not saying we're the only ones, but definitely persons of color live in and experience very, very real. So we're kind of, well, that sounds good. I like that on that side. That sounds good. I'll take that on that side. But then they feel guilty about that.
Yeah, because
they're not choosing sides fully.
Well, it's hard. It's hard being Black, Christian, and American, right? So you have to.
Wait. Black in America, Christian in America. Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? And
then now you, female.
Right, and female, right? So you have to, so, and I think you said it before, so you would love to identify as a Christian first, right? Go, hey, see me, I love God.
Yeah.
But, let someone wear a T-shirt every day that says, Jesus is God and I love God. That's not how you see me. You see me as a woman, you see me as Black, you see me, and then maybe you may, after you talk to me, hopefully figure out that I'm a Christian, and then it's like, all right, how do I identify in America? Because then we could talk about what it is to be American. I'll put that in quotes, and because there's an idea of American, then there is Black, and there is Christianity, and we're all these things. And now looking at a party, of course, no party can ever speak to all these different elements, and then you've always taught us to, in terms of ranking your values and what's important, and then you allowing that to filter, how you make decisions. And, if this person is speaking to the most important thing to you, and that is where your value, that is where your heart is, then maybe that's where you should vote.
This is very important because it brings us to the purpose of this conversation, the conversation we had in part one, because at the end of the day, people, and this is leading up to the election, people have to decide what's going to guide them in making that decision, to cast that vote. What are the guides? I mean, values, what's important to you, what your concerns are, and should they feel guilty if they feel that one person, one candidate represents more of those values than another candidate, and they're going to go in that direction. Are we forced by the pressure of our society and even our own Black community to make decisions when we vote based upon other people's feelings and ideas? Or do we have a concrete plan to say, well, this is what's going to guide me in casting my ballot?
I can say that one of the biggest issues now in a post-COVID America is healthcare. And regardless of where you stand on race, where you stand on economics, right, the ability to have a pre-existing health condition post-COVID, where millions of Americans have been affected and still get insurance, that is absolutely on the line with this election. And I think that as a bedrock, that's a bedrock issue that people need to think about and see where they stand and see where the candidates stand. How many people don't even look at that idea, like healthcare? Cut you off. I think that's a very key point that you just pointed out, that people need to really think about that, especially with their pre-existing condition. Because COVID is a pre-existing condition for a lot of people now. It's causing some lingering effects in people. And so as you think about, there's a landmark healthcare case coming to the Supreme Court November 10th, 7 days after the election, and so it's important. And this is a part of that education aspect of voting. It's not just a black and white issue. It's bigger than that, and that's why I tell people that. So you gotta get educated. Right. Understand that there's a whole lot of other stuff that is, moving underneath
the facade or the
Under the radar.
under the
yeah,
radar,
yeah,
yes, thank you. Under the radar,
Yeah.
that still needs to be discussed, still needs to have a conversation, still needs to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's going to affect you as much as the race issue, as much as why did he not one candidate express a certain way of handling the COVID issue and whatnot. So we have to educate. We have to be educated.
And that's what we were texting about during service, right? I was like, we need political education. People need to be aware of the issues that actually matter. One candidate saying he's not racist does not mean that he's not racist.
Right.
One candidate being black
Does not.
does not mean that they have black values.
We've seen it.
And we've seen it. And so I do think that it's important that we have real conversations about the real issues.
Because I think they would love for us to just stay at race, right? They would love for black people to just
Stay
stay
ignorant.
at the race issue
Yep.
and to never ever, because here's the best part, maybe that's the only thing we'll talk about once they get into office, and then we'll never quite address all the other issues that are also, actually impacting us, whether it be financially, educationally, health-wise, and we'll just stay there. And I'm like, all right, let's just address this, and then
So many
There are
bills.
groups of Americans. There are groups of Americans who don't even entertain that conversation of whether or not a candidate likes them. They don't even care.
Yeah.
Right,
Oh,
right.
do you like Jewish people? No. That doesn't matter to me because my voting block is voting based on values that are in alignment. And so if your voting record is not in alignment with my voting block, you don't get it.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and how many bills have passed that people don't even know about?
Right.
That have been put into action. Look at coming up November 10th. What's that going to say about that bill?
Yeah, massive.
So there's so many things, and and if we say ignorant and look at just the race issue, we're gonna miss out on why our votes matter.
But don't get me wrong. I definitely am not voting for a racist candidate. I will never give that person my vote.
Yeah.
And so I'm very firm in where I stand in terms of this election. This is not the platform for that.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's important. But you're right. That's not the only issue.
Also, even looking at economics, like, how are people, what's already taken place in the last 4 years? Has that been good? Has that created more disparity? Do you want more of that, or do you want less of that? You know what I mean? And having, and really having that conversation and saying to yourself, and not just looking at, oh my gosh, the stock market is at a.
Well, I got to bring my biblical framework.
The stock market is from the Obama years, though.
Right.
Yeah, because you got to ask
But it's
the question.
also how real is.
Look at because we as blacks, we were asking about the financial gap, right? The wealth gap, about decreasing the wealth gap. But now looking at the way the past 4 years, looking at Corona, I think the wealth gap in general now has increased.
Yes.
And where it's not just the black wealth gap, but a particular working group wealth gap.
Blue collar,
Yep.
white workers.
I tell poor white people all the time that Trump has been actually better for me than he has been for you, right? Like, I got these degrees, I can, I make a little bit of money, and so I can take advantage of the tax code and make it make sense for me. But and without kind of like really coming at him, but he absolutely does not represent anything that I care about. But there are people who have been disproportionately set back by him, who are absolutely going gung-ho for him simply because he seems to represent an ideal that they believe in.
Yeah, and that's where that's the power of perception.
Yep.
All right, overshadowing reality.
Yeah.
So these conversations are great, and I think they're necessary. You're the head of our social justice division, and I think that it would be great to continue these kind of conversations and call it a social justice forum, where we kind of talk through these things and share our ideas. I think it's important for people to know clearly what their values are, what's most important to them, and vote their values. And like I said, you and I talked about this during the service. People say, well, vote your conscience. Well, it depends on how your conscience has been informed.
Right.
What has informed your conscience?
Right.
But when we're talking about values, we're talking about what's important to you, most important. What are your concerns? And does this individual represent those concerns more than the other person that you are thinking about? I want to thank you guys. And
Thank you.
generically speaking, for being a part of this. Boom.
No, that wasn't a boom. You didn't
This
hear
is
what
a
he
Brooklyn
said.
tech.
That was no, Brooklyn tech.
Brooklyn tech.
see? That's why I told you this is what they do. No,
That's like BTHS type
told
thing.
you. So don't invite them back.
See, that's what happened. And divide takes place, not in our camp. You see?
You did the Brooklyn tech thing.
Well, this is Pastor A.R. Bernard, and I want to thank our panel for being with us. And thank you for joining us, too, because this is going to continue to play after the election, no matter who becomes our next president or remains our current president. I think these are ongoing conversations, and we want you to be an educated electorate. We want you to know what the issues are beyond the rhetoric, and we want to bring information to you that empowers you to make better decisions about yourself, about your family, about the use of that ballot that you've been blessed with. So thank you, and until next time, God bless.